Awesome. All right. So what the chapter that we're covering today, we're gonna start the formal reading on page 151. And the chapter is A Vision for You. And for me, this is a really, really exciting chapter. But one of the things, oh, beautiful. Thank you, Rob. That's lovely. Oh, you know what I'll do is I'll give you a co-host if you'd like. Just in case. Super appreciated. All right, so you can tell I haven't done anything yet. Already got distracted. So again, if you have comments or things, put it in the chat. We will definitely go on tangents. But the chapter is A Vision for You, and let's hop over to page 14 because I want to show you guys something, and something that was pointed out to me that I think, I don't know, it was really cool when I saw this. And so we're on page 14. And we're going to the second last paragraph where it says, while I lay in the hospital. And page 14, what we're talking about is Bill's story. And what's happened here is Bill has gone to the town's hospital for the third time. He's taken the course of action that has become our 12 steps. And he's had a deep and profound spiritual experience. And on the second last paragraph of page 14, Bill W. has this vision. And this vision is, while I lay in the hospital, the thought came that there were thousands of hopeless alcoholics who might be glad to have what had been so freely given me. Perhaps I could help some of them. They, in turn, might work with others. So that vision that Bill Wilson, he has in the hospital bed, you know, after having his profound white light spiritual experience, that vision, maybe I could help other people the way that I was helped, and maybe they could work with others. That vision is the vision that he is giving to us in the chapter, A Vision for You. And I just love that idea that every time I sit down with a newcomer, every time I sit down and I work with a sponsee, I get to be a small part of the continuation of that vision. And that's really the thrust of what we're going to talk about in this chapter of Vision for You. It's going to be it's going to be some history heavy, which is absolutely my jam. And the reason why is because we're going to see just how where we come from gives us an idea of how quickly we can grow and what we're called to do. So the working with others, the helping others. Welcome, guys. I'm glad you're here. We're on page 151, just kicking off A Vision for You. All right, and so just on page time, we're 8 minutes in, so let's actually start the reading. All right, so it says, for most normal folks, drinking means conviviality, and conviviality. I think Rob's going to throw in the official definition, but I got my unofficial 1930s dictionary. So conviviality is good fellowship, but to convive is to be festive and joyful. So it's that festive, joyful fellowship, or the official definition from the unofficial 1930s dictionary will be in the chat here in a bit. But for most normal folks, drinking means conviviality, companionship, and colorful imagination. It means release from care, boredom, and worry. It is joyous intimacy with friends and a feeling that life is good. Yeah, and so Rob said conviviality, good time, festivity, good company. Absolutely. And so one of the things is I can ask myself, was that my experience? Especially in the early days, was that my experience? That I got that sense of, I got that sense of finally being a part of. It felt like that missing piece. But is my experience now becoming or has become what I'm going to continue to read? Where it says, but not so with us in those last days of heavy drinking. The old pleasures were gone. Is that my experience? They were but memories. Never could we recapture the great moments of the past. There was an insistent yearning to enjoy life as we once did, and an heartbreaking obsession, we'll make a note of that some new miracle of control would enable us to do it. There was always one more attempt and one more failure. Was that my experience? Did I have that yearning that maybe one day, somehow, some way, I could control and enjoy my drinking, that great obsession of every abnormal drinker? Did I have that idea that maybe one day I'd be able to have control? Now, when we talk about control, just for those that are new to the study or new to studies in general, I always like to in step one review as I go throughout the book, just to kind of emphasize, honestly, join anytime. Wherever you're at, join. We'd love to have you. But when we talk about lack of control, what we're talking about is what's known as that physical allergy, that thing that happens to me that once I start to drink, where I need more, and then I need more, and then I need more. And the more I drink and the more I use, the more that I need to drink and use. And I can't control the amount that I take. And has that been my experience, right? Where I don't have any control. And then I look at that like insistent yearning and that obsession that maybe one day I can have that control. What are we talking about there? We're talking about the mental obsession, that obsession of that mind, that thing that happens to me when I'm as sober as I am today, that thinks that thought, when I'm as sober as I am today and my alcoholism is untreated. That's important to note. When I am untreated and I have that thought that tells me this time will be different. Nobody will ever know. I can go out for 3. Or, whatever it is. And did I experience that where I'd go and I'd pick up and I would just ruin my life, and I would come to it and I'd say, that's it, I never want to do this again. And a day, a week, a month later, I would get a thought and think, no, I can do it this time. I got to get it out of my system. Just one. And off I go and I burn my life to the ground. Has that been my experience? Because that is the illness that we're talking about. And these are kind of what really the consequences of this illness begin to look like. It says the less people tolerated us, the more we withdrew from society, from life itself, as we became subjects of capital K, capital A, King Alcohol, shivering denizens of his mad realm, the chilling vapor that is loneliness settled down. And the denizen is an inhabitant, like said, I can't now I've lost that word. It's a citizen, it's a resident, it's an occupant, it's an inhabitant. I just had to go back around to say the word inhabitant. I wasn't going to say it off the bat. So what it's saying, that capital K, capital A, King Alcohol, or capital K, capital whatever is the thing that brings you to this all-inclusive study, that thing that was running our lives, I became this shivering denizen, this shivering citizen, just trying to live and survive. And if you imagine, if you've ever read any of those like history or novels of those like crazy mad kings, you watched a couple of Game of Thrones, you know what I mean? No judgment. I hear season 8 isn't worth it. I didn't watch it. That's not the definition of insanity. Hearing season 8 wasn't worth it and watching it anyways. But that idea of a mad king who is just making these decisions at whim and ruining lives at whim, just like that alcohol was for me. And it destroyed my life at whim, without thought or care. And I'm this shivering citizen, and I've got no power over this thing, and my life is getting ruined, and there's nothing that I can do. And I love that it talks about that chilling vapor that is loneliness. And that vapor, that's that, that fog where you can't see past your hands, that chilling vapor. If you've ever driven alone at night on a stretch and there's some fog and it's not safe, that chilling vapor. And I love that it describes loneliness. And welcome, I'm glad you're here. We're on page 151. We're going about as quickly as I normally do, which is not very quickly. So I'm glad you're here. One of the things is sometimes I like to do when I go and do shares and lead shares, I like to do what I call big book bounce arounds. It's a lot like this big book study, but with even more unbridled ADHD. And I just kind of go through and bounce around the book and connect things together. And one of those is the topic of loneliness. And see, on page 1, Bill Wilson said, I was very lonely and again turned to alcohol. And I don't know about you guys, but in my experience, loneliness has nothing to do with physical proximity to another human being. And you know how I know that? Is because I don't know about you, but my experience is I have felt absolutely, utterly alone in a room full of people. Heck, I've felt utterly and absolutely alone in a stadium full of other human beings. I felt absolutely and utterly alone in a meeting. And I don't know about you, but I felt absolutely alone in the middle of a relationship. And I felt absolutely alone in the middle of an act of intimacy. And so at least for me, what I've come to find out is loneliness doesn't have anything to do with physical proximity to another human being. What I've found to be true for me is that loneliness seems to be an acute sense of separation from the God of my understanding. That's what loneliness means for me. And you know how I know that? It's in step 5, we have what we call the step 5 promises. And it talks in the step 5 promises that now I can be alone at perfect peace and ease. What's changed between step 1? I was very lonely and again turned to alcohol. And step 5, those step 5 promises. I've cleared away some of the stuff inside of me that is blocking me from that power. And one of my favorite things is when we start off the chapter working with others, it talks about how we get to see loneliness vanish in others. In working with others, we get to see that vanish for them. So welcome, guys. I'm glad you're here. I got on a little loneliness tangent. We're on page 151. And it says, some of us sought out sordid places, hoping to find understanding, companionship, and approval. Awesome. Rob's got the official definition. Sordid is morally degraded, foul, filthy, and let me say, despicable. I always like to, this is a joke that I make a lot, so bear with me. It's like, oh, sordid, title of my sex inventory. But what does sordid mean for me? Sordid means for me is those lines in the sand that I continued to cross. Those things that I said that I would never do, and I start to do because I feel so alone and so separate, and nothing is relieving and alleviate the ache. And I'm doing those things that I never wanted to do. That for me is experientially what sordid looks like for me. And it says, momentarily we did. And that's the thing about instant gratification. It only works for an instant. And even when I get that relief from those things that I'm seeking, at least in my experience, it tends to not last. And then momentarily we did, then would come oblivion and the awful awakening to face the hideous 4 horsemen. And you'll notice they're in capitals, just like capital K, capital A, King Alcohol. And when I see things capitalized, they're often, not universally, but often things that I can put in the place of God in my life, sometimes for better and sometimes for worse. And these were the things, these 4 horsemen who were what were driving me and pulling me and running my life. Capital T, terror. And I don't know about you. Yeah, terror is fear. And for me, terror is a lot more than fear. Terror for me is that all encompassing, you know, that fear where it grips your chest and you're just pulled. That for me is terror. And then, oh, hold on. My sponsor said I was in the place where I was deteriorating quicker than I could lower my standards. Absolutely. That's what it means to get to that place of sordid. You know, it's getting worse before I can, you know, lower those standards. Absolutely. And then bewilderment. Now I'm gonna use my 1930s dictionary, but I'm sure Rob's got us. Bewilderment is that state of being greatly puzzled, perplexed, this tangled mess of confusion. I don't know about you, but I was bewildered. I didn't know how my life got to the state that it was in. Tangled, you know, the mess where I didn't know what to do next. I genuinely didn't know why I was doing these things that I didn't want to do. I was bewildered. And then frustration, capital F, frustration. Now, I don't know about you guys, and I'm sure you're all very spiritually well and could never relate to something like this, but occasionally, a time or two, I may have been want to minimize things and not necessarily do a 10-step or take it through the columns. And I might have a tendency to be like, no, no. It's not a resentment. I'm just a little frustrated. It's not a big deal. Now, have anyone here ever have those things that aren't a big deal that we're thinking about all day, every day, but it's not a big deal? I don't need to take you through the columns. So for me, when I see things like that, capital F frustration, it's telling me I got to dig deep and continue to do this work to clean this stuff up, frustration, because that drives me just as much as anything else. And despair, that place of hopelessness. And happy drinkers who read this page will understand. And I can ask myself, do I understand? You know, I was working with a sponsee. This was a couple of years ago, and we were, reading this, and I was talking about how I have a twin brother. And my twin brother, it's a little frustrating because if you would have pegged any one of us to have this illness, I promise you it wouldn't have been me. You'd think for sure it's going to be him. And he's a normal guy. He really likes his whiskey, but he does not seem to drink or just engage in the way that I do. And so I was meeting with the sponsee, and we were kind of talking, and what I did was I was explaining how this is my experience. Page 151 is my experience. And in that, I can see the progression of the illness that I have. And we kind of got to thinking, what is my twin brother's experience? And so I took a picture of that page and I texted it to my non-alcoholic twin brother. And I said, what do you relate to on this page? And you know what he said? It's kind of social, I guess. Followed up by why are you texting me? And did you know that they made they made vodka for milk? That was the most random thing, because I was like, what? And I had to explain, listen, I'm sure you're aware that I'm not a top paragraph person. I'm a second paragraph person, but he knows I like cows and weird things like that. So that's why I was sharing about that. But just that my experience, if I relate to this, this is something that non-alcoholics, they don't relate to. And then it talks about now and then, a serious drinker being dry at the moment, not recovered, not free, dry, separated from alcohol. Says, I don't miss it at all. Feel better, work better, having a better time, happy to be here, happy to be sober. I'll take 24 and pass it on, right? That, it's great. How you doing? Fine. Everything's fine. I'm great. I'm so full of joy. That, have I been there? Can I relate to that? It says, as ex-problem drinkers, we smile at such a Sally. Yeah, outburst, quick-witted response is what Sally means. In my 1930s dictionary, which is not the unofficial 1930s dictionary, it spoke about how a Sally was also a sudden, bursting forth of troops. So if you were sending people to war, it was like sending forth, a Sally would be like sending in the cavalry. And isn't that kind of what that is? No, I'm great. I love being sober. It's great. It's so much better. I love it. And I'm dry and I'm twisted up on the inside and I'm miserable, but I'm sending forth that little outburst of troops. No, everything's okay. I'm trying to convince myself. Have I been there? It says, we know our friend is like a boy whistling in the dark to keep up his spirits. Imagine being a small child alone at night. Maybe the visual I always have is like a little boy walking through a cemetery, because that's the spookiest thing when you're a kid, and just whistling to try to, no, I'm okay. No, I'm okay. And that's what it was like for me when my alcoholism was untreated. No, I'm okay. And I desperately wasn't okay, but I couldn't put words to it. He fools himself. Inwardly, he would give anything to take half a dozen drinks and get away with them. What am I after? I'm after that relief. I'm after that sense of ease and comfort. It says he will presently try the old game again. What does that mean? I will drink again, for he isn't happy about his sobriety. And what I always want to point out about there, at least what my experience is, you know, when I came to AA, I would hear, and meetings and 12-step in general, I would hear people talk about this thing, this buzzword, emotional sobriety. You know, anyone ever hear about emotional sobriety? And then over the course of the last few years, I've seen emotional sobriety meetings, and Bill W. has this essay or letter on emotional sobriety. And I, again, you spiritual giants, I'm sure, would never relate to any of this. But I had this thought that that's for the nerds. Like emotional sobriety, that's for the keeners, you know, those are for the nerds that have a bag full of highlighters. I got a bag full of highlighters right there. Spoilers, I've become the nerd. But what I find out is that, yeah, oh, those are good highlighters too. Sorry, now we're all just showing off our highlighters. Don't get us started on the pens for inventory. Ooh, I got my preferences. All right. So this is how things get on tangents. But what I've come to find out is for someone of my type, for an alcoholic of my type, emotional sobriety is not extra credit. Emotional sobriety is a minimum requirement for someone like me. Because if my alcoholism isn't treated, if I'm living in that place of loneliness where that vapor is settling down, I don't know about you, but I felt that loneliness drunk and sober. Actually, for me, far more sober than I did in my active alcoholism or in my active addiction, far more in sobriety. I need to experience that peace, that freedom, that joy, that relief, and that release that I got in the bottle. I need that sober. Because for somebody like me, if I don't, what happens is the mental obsession will come. I will drink and use again. It's not a matter of if, but when. And so emotional sobriety is not a luxury. Also, I don't know about you, but never once in my life have I been like, I'll just settle for one, you know? Oh, that was good. 3 drinks? That's great. You know, 1 hoot of crack? No, that I'm quite satisfied with 1 hoot of crack. Thank you. I'm good. Never once. So why would I satisfy for 1 spiritual experience? Why would I settle for physical abstinence? I want to keep growing and I want to keep seeking. That might not be the most appropriate metaphor, but it's the one we got today. So, all right. And it says, he isn't happy about his sobriety, 152. He cannot picture life without alcohol. Have I been there? And then it says, someday he will be unable to imagine life either with alcohol or without it. Oh, and I think, Rob, if anyone is interested in the emotional sobriety article, Rob's put it in the chat. And if I remember, what I'll do is I'll pop it into the WhatsApp group after the meeting too, because, you know, we're talking about this stuff. So, so he cannot picture life without alcohol. Someday he will be unable to imagine life either with alcohol or without it. Then he will know loneliness as few do. He will be at the jumping off place. He will wish for the end. And nowhere is that a good place to be except in the rooms of 12-step. That is the perfect position to be in when I'm coming to the rooms. When I'm beaten and I'm broken and I am come to the end of myself and I'm at that jumping off place. And I know that I can't do it on my own, but I don't know how I'm going to do it. That place. And you know, for those that have been coming to this study a while, you guys know that I love my sneaky prayers. And I just want to talk about a sneaky prayer in the reading, in the chapter, how it works, which also encompasses the reading that we see at many meetings. There's a little prayer. And it's just a prayer. If I feel like I'm at the jumping off place, it might be a helpful prayer to say. And actually, why don't I share it with you exactly where it is? It's on page 59. And it says, it's right after the paragraph, half measures availed us nothing. It says we stood at the turning point. Because doesn't this sound like the turning point? That I can't do my life on my own way anymore. It's not working. This is the turning point. I'm at that jumping off place. And that's really what the third step is all about, that jumping off place, diving into this new way of life. Let's be real, I wasn't excited to do. I was really scared of. And so on page 59, it says we ask. And any time in this book it says we ask, that is a prayer. We ask his protection and care with complete abandon. So for those that are new or maybe struggling or afraid to take a spiritual action or at that jumping off place, feel free to use God, Creator, higher power, whatever is for you. I ask your protection and care with complete abandon. That's what we're going to do. We're going to leap with complete abandon. Now, popping back over to page 152. We take that leap of faith, and here's what happens. It says, we have shown how we got out from under. And how did I get out from under? How did I get out of that predicament of hopelessness? Well, if we're writing our books, we can make a note, the 12 steps to have a spiritual awakening, a spiritual experience. And if you're not writing in your book, that's okay. That's not mandatory. I'm just joking around at the study. It says, you say yes. Am I to be consigned to a life where I shall be stupid, boring, and glum, like some righteous people like I see? Am I going to be like those nerds with the highlighters? Maybe. You might be. You might find an appreciation for stationery that I didn't know I would have. But it says, I know I must get along without liquor, but how can I? Have you a sufficient substitute? So that thing, I need a sufficient substitute for the ease and comfort that I once got. Again, that emotional sobriety, not for keeners, not extra credit. It's minimum requirement. I need a sufficient substitute. And this next paragraph tells us exactly what it is. It says, yes, there is a substitute, and it is vastly more than that. Thank goodness. Thank goodness I don't have to settle for trading one for one, something vastly more than a sufficient substitute. And it says it is a fellowship in Alcoholics Anonymous. There you will find release from care, boredom, and worry. Now, these are some powerful promises. Your imagination will be fired. Life will mean something at last. I don't know about you, but life had no meaning when I got here. You know, those bedevilments. The most satisfactory years of your existence lie ahead. And man, there's something about that I find to be a powerful promise. How could you know what lies ahead, right? But the most satisfactory, meaningful, powerful years of our lives lie ahead of us, are to come. Thus we find the fellowship, and so will you. So what I want to point out is, and like, for those that know me, I'm not a meet and makers make it sort of person. I am a take the steps, have a spiritual awakening, help others sort of person. This paragraph, a little bit it is pointing to meetings. And I'm not going to criticize meetings. Heck, we're in a big book study right now. It'd be a little hypocritical if I did. And actually what I find is more often than not, a lot of my sponsorship is like, go to more meetings. That's where you're going to find people to work with. And yeah, going to meetings helps. And sometimes we go to meetings and it just fires that imagination. You know, before this study, we were kind of talking about how over the last few years, it's been like this incredible renaissance, getting connected with people who are excited about the big book, excited about this work, excited about this way of life from all over the world. I don't know if that's your experience, but that was mine. It has been mine, and it's just been incredible. And you know, there's those meetings where you go and you just get fired up and you're excited, and it's like, yeah, I want to do this thing. You know, I think one of the biggest compliments I ever had was I did a talk on step 4 one time, and somebody was like, that makes me want to do a 4-step. I'm like, yeah, amazing, you know, like that. And it does, it helps. But I don't think that's what that paragraph is talking about. And we're going to see why, because in the next few paragraphs, what we're going to start talking about is the fellowship that was created, one person carrying this message to another, that fellowship that is created through working with others and then watching them help others. I think that's what it's really talking about. Now, if you're here today and you haven't had that experience yet, I want to lovingly encourage that it does not take long. And our job here is to help you have that experience, help you work with others. Truly, I feel like my purpose in life is to help you. Yes, you find that release from care, boredom, and worry, to help fire your imagination, help your life have meaning and purpose for the most satisfactory years of your life to lie ahead. Now, that's truly my purpose. Now, the bad news with that is I'm not going to go on a scavenger hunt. I got a way that has worked in my life. You know what I mean? I have something that has worked. So that's what I have to offer. And that's what I want to help you with, is these 12 steps to have a deep and powerful spiritual experience. And so it says, how is this to come about? Where am I to find these people? You are going to meet these new friends in your own community. Near you, alcoholics are dying helplessly like people in a sinking ship. And that's a beautiful tie-in to page 17. And the metaphor on page 17 was the Titanic disaster. And in the Titanic disaster, those that survived the Titanic, they had that common problem, that common peril of surviving something horrific and horrifically traumatic. But what they did not have was what binds us together, which is the common solution, a spiritual awakening, and a way out on which we can agree and join in brotherly and harmonious action, the 12 steps. So us, with those three things, that common problem, common solution, common program of action, we can help those who are stuck in the problem, who are drowning. And that's what I'm called to do. It says, if you live in a large place, there are hundreds, high and low, rich and poor. These are future fellows of Alcoholics Anonymous. Among them, you will make lifelong friends. You will be bound to them with new and wonderful ties, for you will escape disaster together, and you will commence shoulder to shoulder upon your common journey. Again, the common journey is these 12 steps as a way of life, common journey. And I love shoulder to shoulder. And I really try to emphasize that when I work with people, that we are shoulder to shoulder in this thing. I might have a little bit more experience with inventory because I need it. I might have a little bit more experience with amends because I had to do it. You know what I mean? I might have had a bit more experience, but I'm no better than you. I'm no worse than you. We are equal in this thing and we're working together. And then it says, then you will know what it means to give of yourself, that others may survive and rediscover life. And I love that I get to be a small part in the miracle of others, a small part. You'll learn the full meaning of love thy neighbor as thyself, to truly love others. And this is a little bit of a tangent that I'm going to go on. A lot of people, I had a friend, I was on the phone with her. This was maybe a year or so ago, and we were just kind of catching up and talking. And she said, Paige, you were the most negative, self-deprecating person that I had ever met, which means I win. I win at negativity and self-deprecation. I win. And that's truly who I was. And that's truly who I was kind of around the rooms and not fully doing these things. Because I'm one of those, like, I got to be all in doing this work. And, I had a lot of people that would come up to me and say, Paige, you got to love yourself first. Love yourself. Love yourself. And I couldn't do it, man. People would be like, say affirmations. And I could not do it. I hated myself. And so, the idea of love thy neighbor as thyself, I'm like, I don't want to be mean to them as I am to me. You know what I mean? Like, that's who I was. But as a result of doing this work, this course of action, something happened. And there's a line that we're going to read later on in a vision for you. In finding God, he found himself. What happened for me is I started to connect with a power greater than myself, the God of my understanding. But I really started to see, especially when I was sponsoring others and I was receiving the 5 steps of others. And I was just talking with somebody about this today. This thing would happen to me is I'd sit down with somebody and they'd share with me that deep, dark secret, that thing that they hated themselves, that they wanted to kill themselves behind, that thing that carried all that weight and shame, and they didn't want to tell a soul and take it to their grave. And I was acutely aware that how I felt about them changed. And what I mean by that is I loved them more. In that moment, I loved them. And I didn't want them to hurt, and I didn't want them to suffer, and I didn't want them to carry that weight. And I could see beyond the sum of the worst things that we have ever done as this human being who is incredibly valuable and worthy and precious and so important. And I could see that so clearly with the people that I was working with. And then there was a lurking notion that maybe, just maybe, I wasn't so special that I would be exempt from that. And also, just maybe, if this fall down failure of a drunk, smoking crack behind a dumpster, wetting my pants, sort of failure of a human being can love another human being, and not even despite those things, you know what I mean? I can just love them. I am deeply flawed and frequently wrong. I'm sure my sponsor will tell you. If I can love them like that, how might the God of their understanding feel about them? And then how might that God feel about me? And so that's what opened it up for me. And that's where I really began to learn the full meaning of love thy neighbor as thyself. And that was just my experience with that. And I would encourage you strongly to have your own. Be like, I don't believe you, Paige. Cool, do it. Work this program. Kick ass. Go help others. Heck yeah. Do it to prove me wrong. I don't care. Do it, Yeah. And so it says, it may seem incredible that these men are to become happy, respected, and useful once more. How can they rise out of such misery, bad repute, and hopelessness? And for those that have been coming along this study for a while, I always emphasize way of life, common journey, we're not done, but I also emphasize hopelessness, because when I hit that place of hopelessness, that's when I'm willing and open and able to accept the hope that is on offer. So from that hopelessness, we'll accept that hope. So I gotta be pretty desperate to do a 4th step, you know what I mean? Gotta be pretty hopeless to make amends, even to that jerk, And it says the practical answer is that since these things have happened among us, that they can happen with you. Should you wish them above all else and be willing to make use of our experience, we are sure they will come. If I want this above all else, other people to find recovery. Now, that's not in a codependent putting out fires, trying to manage their life. That's not my job. But to offer these steps taken out of this book, if I do that and wish for that above all else, and make use of this experience, they are sure it will come. And we know that that's true. We know that hope, that we are sure it will come. We know. You know why? Because 80 some odd years later, here we are hanging out at a Zoom room from all over the world, working with others, helping others. It has come. And I love this. It says the age of miracles is still with us. Our own recovery proves that. Miracles are these things that, we think it's a once in a million shot of lightning sort of deal. But a human being who has recovered from this illness is nothing less than a miracle. For somebody like me, a miracle is contented sobriety. You know what I mean? That's pretty miraculous. And we see it happening all the time. In the Forward to the Second Edition, it talks about a wholesale miracle and talking about miracles happening at Costco, you know, Costco-sized miracles. That's what's happening. And oh, awesome. I just saw your, oh, yeah, actually, I'll announce that after. Sorry, I'm not going to announce that in the middle. Cool. You can tell it's all over the place. I'm glad y'all are here. So it says our hope is that when this chip of a book, and I love that, chip of a book, is launched on the world tide of alcoholism defeated. So again, hopeless. Drinkers will seize upon it to follow its suggestions. So following the directions that are contained in this book, many, we are sure, will rise to their feet and march on. They will approach still other sick ones, and fellowships of Alcoholics Anonymous may spring up in each city and hamlet, havens for those who must find a way out. And again, a way out was possibly going to be one of the titles for this book. Didn't end up, they sent Fitz Mayo on a little errand to go see, and there's like 22, and they did, by the time they sent Fitz Mayo on that errand, they decided they weren't going to do a way out. So just sending Fitz on fool's errands. Anywho, but that's what's happened. Now it says, in the chapter, Working with Others, you gathered an idea of how we approach and aid others to help, how we work with others, 12-step work. Suppose that now, and I love this, through you, several families have adopted this way of life. So again, way of life, this isn't a set it and forget it program. This isn't 90 days. This isn't, you know, go real hard for, you know, right after New Year's, like, you know, this, or right after Stampede for the Calgarians, you know what I mean? This is a way of life. But I love that it is through me. See, I get to be a demonstration of this power. And as I demonstrate this power to others, we don't just demonstrate that to the people we work with, but we get to demonstrate it to their families and their loved ones. You know, and on page 97, it talks about, though a man does not respond, there's no reason you should neglect his family. Oftentimes we don't have that ability, kind of, you know, because that's not how we met the guy. That's not how we met the sponsee. We're not connected in that way. But it is one of the most incredible, powerful things to see a family recover, you know. And so it says, you will want to know how to proceed from that point. Perhaps the best way to treating you to a glimpse of your future will be to describe the growth of the fellowship among us. Here is a brief account. And this is where we're getting into the history. And this, man, this is where I love the history, because if I'm struggling with belief in a power greater than myself, man, it's all over the history. So 1 year ago, or years ago, not 1 year ago, years ago, oh yeah, the telephone, yeah, we'll see. My hope is to get there. We'll do our best. And so it says, years ago, in 1935, one of our number made a journey to a certain Western city. So this is Bill Wilson, and that city is Akron, Ohio. So Bill Wilson goes from New York City to travel to Akron, Ohio. And kind of the purpose, he was going to combine, I believe, three different, thank you for coming. He was going to combine three different companies, and or several different companies, and he was going to, you know, come off rich, and that was his point. Oh, you have it. Oh, this is great. So it was going to be the National Rubber Machinery Company. So the National Rubber Machinery Company builder, I can't read today. They build rubber presses and other equipment used for tire manufacturing. And Bill was got involved in a proxy fight. And so the situation, I'm not reading well. I'm really good at reading the big book, other things, less good at reading. And so there was this whole fight, and it got bogged down. And actually Akron, Ohio this is a random fun fact. It's maybe not fun, but it's definitely a fact. That Akron, Ohio was really a big place for tire manufacturing. The Firestone, I believe it's Firestone there. And so that was going to, and like, you know, combining these companies, and that was going to happen. Now it says from a business standpoint, his trip came off badly. This is something that I just think is important. Had he been successful in his enterprise, he would have been set on his feet financially, which at the time seemed vitally important. But his venture, now this is the lawsuit that you'll see in the chat that I didn't read very well. His venture wound up in a lawsuit and bogged down completely. The proceeding was shot through, with much hard feeling and controversy. So Bill Wilson, he's showing up to Akron. Listen, I'm gonna make it rich. I'm finally gonna get back to page 3 where I had arrived, right? And no, it falls apart. Nobody's talking to each other. It's bad. Lawyers are involved. And isn't that always how a spiritual awakening begins? See, I think a spiritual awakening ought to be me soaring on the wings of success and getting exactly what I want. But isn't it always that I come to that place of spiritual experience, that I come to that place of the God of my understanding, not getting what I want at all, and losing that which I think is so vitally important? You know, I got to make money. And as a result of not making money, what's come from that? Something so much more. Now, I'll ask you guys very kindly to remind me that if the next time I'm complaining I didn't get something I wanted. You know what I mean? Because don't think I'm over here that I'm like a spiritual giant. Like, I struggle with it too. But yeah, I found I rarely come to God on the wings of success. Far more likely not getting what I want and in a lot of pain. So it says, bitterly discouraged, he found himself in a strange place, Akron, Ohio, discredited and almost broke. You know, it's just kind of been a theme that's kind of come up in my life in the last little while, kind of working with people. That fear of what we think people think of us, that fear of gossip, that fear of people thinking I'm bad, I'm wrong, I'm the worst thing that you could possibly ever think of me. He's discredited and almost broke. Still physically weak and sober, but a few months, he saw that his predicament was dangerous. He wanted so much to talk with someone, but whom? Now, again, one of the things I want to point out is those 6 months, Bill Wilson, 6 months sober, he goes to the town's hospital. He essentially, you know, I'm just summarizing, essentially works the steps. They weren't laid out like they are today. Has a spiritual experience. And from that moment, he goes and he works with others. And he's active in working with others quite diligently. So that's what he's been doing for 6 months. Again, it does not take long to get well. You know what I mean? 6 months, he's been working with others for almost the entire 6 months. And so that working with others, that's important to see what happens when he gets, you know, brought back to sobriety, you know, or brought back to sanity, excuse me. He wanted so much to talk with someone, but who, right? That feeling of perhaps loneliness. So it says, one dismal afternoon, he paced a hotel lobby, wondering how his bill was to be paid. Now, I have got, let me see. Hold on, I'm gonna have to share a Google search, but hold on. Let's see. And if you look here, you can kind of see. So the hotel is in Akron, Ohio. And it was called the Mayflower Hotel. And these are just some pictures of that's Bill, that's Bob. That's just for people who haven't seen it. If you look at Rob's screen, you'll see the telephone. And so that's the hotel. And that's the telephone booth and the church directory that we're going to talk about. And some of these pictures down here, these are the hotel lobby. So this is where he's pacing, you know what I mean? And this is where he's at right now in the story, you know? So at one end of the room stood a glass-covered directory. And here's that glass-covered directory of local churches. Down the lobby, a door opened. An attractive door opened into an attractive bar. He could see the gay crowd inside. In there, he would find companionship and release. And so what's going on at this moment? So in this moment, no worries. Thank you so much for coming here. Glad you're here. So he's in this hotel, and he's discredited, he's humiliated, he's broken. He's only got enough money to maybe pay his hotel room or go back to New York. He doesn't have the money for both. And I'm sure he's at that place of self. And he's feeling lonely, again, lonely, perhaps that sense of disconnect from God rather than that disconnect from others. And on one side of the room is the door to the bar, and it opens up. And it's when you can kind of hear the bar and that laughter, that ha 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 ha, and the ice clinking on the glass, clink, clink, clink. That's on one side. It's not literally on one side, but we're doing the theatrics with it. And on the other is the directory and the phone that we see right there. And it says, unless in the bar, he could find companionship and release, unless he took some drinks, he might not have the courage to scrape up an acquaintance and would have a lonely weekend. This is probably in the time when we spoke to each other and couldn't isolate on our phones. By the way, I'm not judging. Sometimes it's nice to just isolate on our phones. And it says, of course, he couldn't drink, but why not sit hopefully at a table, a bottle of ginger ale before him? After all, had he not been sober 6 months now? Perhaps he could handle, say, 3 drinks, no more. Fear gripped him. He was on thin ice. Again, it was the old insidious insanity of that first drink. So the mental obsession hits. With a shiver, he turned away and walked down the lobby to the church directory. Music and gay chatter still floated to him from the bar. But what about his responsibilities, his family, and the men who would die because they would not know how to get well? Ah, yes, those other alcoholics. There must be many such in this town. And so in this moment, what happens is Bill Wilson, and I love the sort of theatrics of telling it in this way. On one side is the bar and the other is the phone. And he's got that idea, just 3 drinks, no more. I've been sober 6 months. I know what this is. And he's restored to sanity. And how did he get restored to sanity? What had he been doing actively and vigorously up for those entire 6 months? Working with others. Carrying that message to others. That's what allowed him to be sane. And who is he thinking of in that moment? He's not thinking of, I got to call my sponsor. He's not thinking of, I got to find an Oxford group meeting. What does it say? It's, yes, those other alcoholics. There must be many men in this town. Who can I help? Who can I help? Who can I carry this message to? Our very lives depend upon our constant thought of others and how we might help meet their need. He would phone a clergyman. Now that the initial phone call to that clergyman is going to be Reverend Walter Tunks. Oh, and yeah, here, I'll stop the share so that you guys can have a look at Rob and you can kind of see Walter Tunks. It says his sanity returned and he thanked God. Selecting a church at random from the directory, he stepped into a booth and lifted the receiver. Now, one of the things is and actually I was going to kind of wrap it up there. Norman, that whole thing. I actually, if you don't mind, I might leave that story for next week because we only got 2 minutes left, and there's so much to the story of what happens once he picks up the phone and lifts the receiver. And it's a story about my homegirl, Henrietta Seiberling. I love her. We're going to talk all about my homie girl, Henrietta, homie H. And we're going to talk about the miracle that happened. See, we already saw a miracle that happened when Bill Wilson is restored to sanity and goes to make a call to help another alcoholic. Now, keep in mind, Bill Wilson in that moment had everything and anything that we need. which is a connection with a power greater than ourselves. These directions, this way of life, and a desire to help someone else. That's all we need. That connection, the direction, and the desire to help someone else. And he's restored to sanity. And if in that moment he goes into that bar and he, sits before him, takes a drink, we might not be here today. And so that is one miracle. And so I'm kind of trying to end it on a bit of a cliffhanger, like, ooh, come back next week where we will see the miracles all over what happens in that telephone booth, and my bad girl, Henrietta. So awesome. Thank you guys. And I'll wrap up the recording.